Singapore has a rich history of assets and crypto over the years. They were certainly very early to recognizing the potential of this technology. I got to speedrun Southeast Asia in some ways. Just living in Singapore, working in Indonesia, also did like a payments M&A in Vietnam, and then eventually landed in the Philippines.
With Axie Infinity and in the middle of COVID.
It was just a wild time. There was a new term that was coined, like the MFW, the Metaverse Filipino Worker.
What does trust actually mean for retail users?
Folks who were previously onboarded onto digital assets are still remarkably resilient. We are in an institutional adoption supercycle.
Coinbase is one of the longest standing exchanges in the industry, and it's also one of the only few that's been able to maintain this very clean image. I remember I was having some trouble with my Coinbase account, and I posted on the group, the Singapore crypto group, and you responded. I didn't expect that, and you helped me to resolve it very quickly. And even on Twitter, I've seen Brian, sometimes he responds to like very, very small queries. Very excited to have Hassan today from Coinbase. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Hey, Tanya, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Should we get started with an introduction about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in the crypto space for some time now. Bought my first Bitcoin in 2013. So it feels like a long time ago. Came across the Bitcoin white paper and fell down the proverbial rabbit hole. At the time, I was working in wealth management for my career, and then had moved over to Venmo for payments. And so, I'd started to get closer to some of these, constructs around electronic money and peer-to-peer payments anyway for my day-to-day job. So the more I sort of, read up on Bitcoin at that time, really, the more just fascinating it seemed. And, it was just this really transformative idea of, how payments and really kind of capital markets and the world of money could be re-envisioned to move at the speed of the internet. For the most part, for the first few years, I was really, following it as a hobbyist, nights and weekends. In New York, there used to be this New York Bitcoin Center next to Deutsche Bank down on Wall Street. So a bunch of us would just gather there and talk through all of these ideas. They used to do kind of open outcry, auctions as well, as kind of like an early marketplace. But as the technology evolved and my thinking around evolved, I came to sort of the conviction that I wanted to really move my career towards this industry as well. So after Venmo, I joined a company that was a crypto exchange that was launching in the US, and kind of got to go through that market 0 to 1 journey with them. Fast forward to 2019, I moved to Singapore. At the time, I was with a company called, at that time it was Gojek, now GoTo Group. Was working on their payments unit, and had the good fortune that they had acquired a crypto exchange in the Philippines, and had asked me to go run it on their behalf. So I did that, and really the fun thing about all of that was I got to speedrun Southeast Asia in some ways. Was living in Singapore, working in Indonesia, also did like a payments M&A in Vietnam, and then eventually landed in the Philippines. And so by the time I kind of wrapped up, and we eventually sort of sold off that asset before I joined Coinbase, I felt like I'd gotten a very good sort of broad perspective on both kind of payments across Southeast Asia, as well as the emerging crypto scene over there.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So, when you joined, the company in the Philippines, what year was that?
This is now back in 2021 and early 2022. So it's been a
Okay.
few years.
Wow. So it was really around that time when the Philippines was kind of going through this massive kind of crypto uptake as well, right? With Axie Infinity and in the middle of COVID. What was that like for you at the time in the Philippines?
Yeah, actually feels like a throwback now. So one thing that I appreciated about the Philippines was that they were one of the earlier ones to crypto from a government perspective as well. The Central Bank of the Philippines had set in place a regulatory foundation, a licensing regime. So CoinsPH, where I was one of the earliest recipients of that license as well. So that allowed us to provide regulated, services to consumers over there, allow for kind of fiat off and on ramping, along with other, trading use cases. And so when Web3 gaming was taking off, I mean, it was a very Southeast Asia story. It was being built in Vietnam and consumed in the Philippines, and it was just a wild time. I mean, people were buying real world goods for SLP. The AXS sort of token was kind of doing its thing. NFTs were booming, and it was really exciting in the sense of, I think it was a glimpse into kind of what Web3 could be, and some of these early experiments. And as it happens in crypto, sometimes like things get ahead of themselves, and it got too overheated, and there was an eventual collapse because that gaming economy just couldn't sustain itself. But I think a lot of great tech came out of it. I think users in the Philippines, like the adoption kind of really spiked up. One of the things that's really underappreciated about this whole story for the Philippines is that Philippines relies on a lot of remittances to kind of keep the domestic economy running as well. And so I think at the peak, maybe about 20% of remittances were starting to come in, via digital assets and stablecoins and crypto at that time. So it was becoming like a national topic, for how do we harness the power of digital assets. I think we're going to see this kind of now play through in the next chapter as well, especially as stablecoins and local stablecoins come to the forefront.
Yeah, and for the kind of people who were doing these remittances, because of course, I live in Singapore, and I see that there's a lot of the immigrant economy that kind of sends money back home. Or even for me, I'm from India, where there's a lot of the immigrant economy that sends money home. So when you were kind of seeing this uptake in remittances, was it usually people across the board, or was it people who were kind of more tech savvy? Or what was the general kind of profile of the person that was actually using crypto?
Yeah, it varies a lot, but one of the key archetypes, for the Philippines is this notion of the OFW, the overseas Filipino worker, and there's several kind of occupations that are nested under it. There's a lot of Filipino nurses in the U.S. There's a lot of like overseas workers in different countries and different jobs, but with the core idea that they're earning overseas and then sending money abroad. And then it also reminds me that actually at that time there was a new term that was coined, like the MFW, the Metaverse Filipino Worker. A lot of people were, again, earning from different gaming projects, and then whether they're domestic or abroad, they were kind of cashing out those earnings to support their families back home. So that trend is very persistent of just kind of remittances coming inbound. I think what's changed now is there's just many more digital channels. So again, in the Philippines, actually e-money and e-wallet penetration is incredibly high. One of their national champions called Gcash. At this point, I think they have about like 70, 80 million wallets, which is effectively the entire adult population of the Philippines. There's also, Paymaya and others that are doing incredible work. But suffice to say that between that, as well as the fact that they have real-time payments, same as we enjoy kind of with Fast and Pay Now over here, that allows for interoperability between e-wallets and banks, instant and fee-free retail payments. That allows for a lot of these funds to come through digital channels and then be liquidated to the underlying kind of user's bank account, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so then from the Philippines, you moved to Singapore. And I feel like Singapore's kind of had its own variations of, being a crypto hub. In the last kind of bull run, it was pretty central to the whole kind of crypto ecosystem. And now I think it's also, as the ecosystem grows, it's becoming more and more institutional. What's your general perspective when it comes to Singapore actually being a crypto hub?
Yeah, Singapore has a rich history, assets and crypto over the years. They were certainly very early to recognizing the potential of this technology. Some of it is rooted in the fact that Singapore is a financial hub, and then it's been a fintech hub for the last decade as well. And so it's a natural extension, to move over into digital assets and now stable coins as well. I think overall the space has also matured. So to your point, there's much more just institutional adoption, business adoption than was the case in the last cycle, which was very much still retail driven. And I think all of those factors generally are kind of played into Singapore's strengths as being just a business friendly hub. There's a lot of like multinationals here. There's a lot of financial services providers here that all kind of play into this. I think at last count there was about 300 plus Web3 companies operating in Singapore. So I think even till today, I would say that Singapore is certainly one of the leading crypto and Web3 hubs around the world. That said, a lot has changed in the last 12 to 18 months at this point. So the biggest change being that the US has woken up, right? So under the new administration, as part of their technology priorities, they've said, hey, we want the US to be a leader in both AI and crypto. And that sort of manifested in sort of the, David Sachs being the czar for AI and crypto. They're working on finally, creating a legislative path and regulatory clarity as well. So the Genius Act for stablecoins happened last summer. The Clarity Act for digital asset exchanges and what constitutes a security versus a commodity is being kind of worked through the House right now, and indications are quite optimistic that will pass through as well. And so, what the implication here, not just for Singapore but for other hubs, is that the U.S. is just such a kind of big home for capital, for talent, and just kind of economic prowess, that everyone else just needs to work harder in order to kind of maintain the same position. The UAE certainly woken up as well. Hong Kong is also making moves. So I do think that Singapore also needs to think about like what are some of the moves that it needs to make in order to kind of maintain its pole position that it's enjoyed in the past few years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think from my perspective, obviously this is a very just my own take, but I also feel like maybe Singapore was a bit too early in crypto and they kind of got burned a few times, especially with FTX. Obviously, Temasek, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Singapore, was a huge investor in FTX. And yeah, so obviously I think that has kind of also impacted their stance towards crypto, but I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, certainly these things ebb and flow. The underlying technology is still the same. It's sort of agnostic to these kinds of changes in temperature, and I think the potential for transforming financial services remains the same. That's something that we have a lot of conviction on. Japan is also an early adopter to crypto. JFSA has had a digital assets kind of licensing regime for a long time too, and certainly Japan also had its share of custody hacks and whatnot over the years. But what's interesting is that they've kind of come back to the table in a big way, and they have recognized that hey, we actually do want to be a Web3 hub. So it's interesting to draw some of those comparisons as well. That just because certain maybe sort of incidents have happened, that doesn't negate kind of the broad potential of the entire industry. And one bad apple shouldn't certainly taint the whole bushel.
Yeah, absolutely. So for right now, I'm guessing Coinbase does do a lot of work with the MAS. What's that like in the moment? Is the MAS like relatively friendly? Are they extremely cautious? What's the temperature check there?
Yeah, I mean, we're very proud to be sort of licensed in Singapore and operating onshore in a compliant and long-term trusted manner. Ultimately, you have to have a long-term mindset and a culture of compliance to want to position yourself this way. And we believe that providing regulated services and having a high standard of trust, especially when you're handling users' money, that's something that's very paramount to us as we make our operating decisions and our capital allocation decisions. So in Singapore, we opened up our office here almost 4.5 years now. Initially, it was meant to be more of a commercial coverage office, but as we studied the market and the regulatory regime, we got more conviction that this would really serve as both as an APAC hub for us, but also a very strong domestic market across consumers, institutions, and businesses. So we went through the journey of applying for a license, after the MAS put out the Payment Services Act. This is kind of late 2019. And we have had our major payments institution license for 2.5 years now. So what that translates into on a day-to-day basis is, you have to understand that this is a kind of high standard regulatory environment. So that comes with its advantages, but it also comes with its set of responsibilities. So it starts out with having a governance framework, from the top down, having a board of directors with an independent director, having an MLRO that like reports both to the CEO but also directly to the board of directors as well. Having like an enterprise risk management framework, an overall kind of AML policy, and just a bunch of these artifacts that really help bring the whole thing together, so that you're operating within kind of the regulatory perimeter. So I think you have to kind of start off from that position. It requires certain sort of investments around having an organizational structure, certain kind of key roles filled out, having adequate team capacity across compliance, security, risk, operations, finance, and so on, which we call as like sort of defensive functions, so that you're building out that trusted foundation. Along with that, we're also careful that we don't lose sight of serving the ultimate user. We want to make sure that these products are, along with being trusted, that they're easy to use as well. We really pay a lot of attention to things like onboarding, which in Singapore we're fortunate to have SingPass that you can access. If you're licensed, having access to real-time payment rails, which we have a partnership with Standard Chartered. So you get all of these benefits, by putting in these investments. And then you also want to make sure that, as regulations evolve, or if there's new regs coming in, we're sort of positioned, and we pay attention to those along the way.
I think I can definitely attest to the fact that the onboarding process is really good because I use Coinbase mostly for on ramp, off ramp in Singapore. But honestly, it's so convenient. And I used to live in Hong Kong before this, and I never really found like a good solution there. And I know a lot of people across different countries also really struggle to find good on ramp, off ramp solutions. So Coinbase, it's so intuitive, it's so easy to use, and what I also really like about what you just said is the fact that the emphasis on trust is huge, which of course is super important. But what does that kind of mean for you at Coinbase itself? Is there a lot of discussion around how to win trust? What does trust actually mean for retail users, or anything around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. What it really sort of comes down to is, again, having sort of this set of robust kind of policies and practices. And I think it also just means that, making sure that like our product and engineering teams are working very closely with our legal and compliance teams, so that as we're, releasing new products, releasing new features, we're baking in, not just kind of requirements, but, sometimes expectations as well, of what the regulatory intent might be around like concepts of, call it like consumer protection, safeguarding, conflicts of interest, and so on. So that the point is not just to launch. The point is to have like a sustainable business and a sustainable set of products, so that as they scale, they remain compliant as well. And ultimately, the users will vote with their dollars and their feet. If they believe that they can park large sums of funds with us, whether it's crypto assets or fiat, they will choose to do so, and they will make their decisions based on whether a company is onshore and licensed, or if it's offshore and not.
Yeah. And how do you kind of view the retail versus institutional landscape? Because are you seeing a lot more retail users kind of onboarding themselves in this moment? Or is it like, what is the general usage right now of Coinbase in the
Yeah,
region?
yeah, very it's very dynamic, I would say. Retail sort of has its own set of underlying dynamics, and institutions are slightly sort of different in how they approach the space. So maybe I'll talk about institutions first. I would say broadly, we are in an institutional adoption super cycle. This kind of secular change, really again kicked off, I would say, earnestly after Genius, and then all of these expectations that clarity will pass as well, and the U.S. is effectively sort of not like defanging the SEC, but basically bringing the SEC to really focus on kind of actual risk issues as opposed to just this regulation by enforcement regime that was there a few years ago. So that gives players like banks and large consumer tech companies and just these platforms just more confidence that look, there's a real business opportunity here. And now that there's no reduced kind of franchise risk by wading into this space, this sort of balances out like their business case for moving forward. And so we've seen companies start to kind of hold Bitcoin on their balance sheet. We've seen like hedge funds and asset managers add on kind of allocations into crypto. We've seen wealth managers start to recommend adding digital assets into like their clients' portfolios. And there's a bunch of other kind of things like this, like payment processors are experimenting with stablecoins more. So I think all of those are very positive signals that the institutions are here and crypto is crossing the chasm into mainstream finance. With retail, it's been slightly different in that there was a lot of kind of retail interest and hype last cycle. A lot of that has been muted, in terms of especially new participants. What we do see is that folks who were previously onboarded onto digital assets are still remarkably resilient. There's a lot of hodlers in our user base, and even within Singapore, as much as like 60% of finance forward Singaporeans hold digital assets today. So the adoption rates are still pretty high. I think what people are looking for is some kind of signals that market health is returning, and there's maybe just the next kind of wave of adoption and use cases that are being cracked. But the other kind of two segments that I think are maybe less discussed but are also coming to the forefront, especially in Singapore, are accredited investors, which is sort of a subset of high net worth individuals, you could call. And this set of users we have started servicing recently. We're providing white glove services. We're providing kind of differentiated products for this group. And what we generally see is these users are much more educated around digital assets than we expected, and they already have kind of broad investment portfolios, so they are definitely looking for diversification, and they want to do it again like on a trusted platform where they can park relatively large amounts of capital. So we're quite excited by what we're seeing with AIs with accredited investors. And then the other segment is around like businesses. So this is both kind of small and medium enterprises, as well as corporates. So this is a funny one because for a long time we had like a consumer platform, and then we had an institutional platform. But what we saw was like these kind of venture funded startups and SMEs. They really wanted to use this technology for making payments, kind of utilizing stable coins, even having some level of exposure to digital assets for investment upside. But if they went on the consumer, they couldn't onboard on the consumer because it's an entity, and the institutional onboarding process was just very heavy because it's made for banks and regulated FIs. So last November at SFF, we announced Coinbase for Business in Singapore. So now like Accra registered entities can actually onboard our platform where they're getting the best of both. They're getting like slimmed down, and onboarding, and they're getting all the kind of best in class features, that existed on the retail platform. So that's an area of growth that we're quite excited about. SMEs are generally kind of very sensitive to, like payments and pricing. And so they can just kind of, use our platform. They can convert USDC to USD one for one. They can convert XSGD to SGD one for one. We allow them to convert across these pairs at 5 basis points, which is basically the like the best sort of wholesale rate that you can get in the market. So we're very optimistic that we can really bring this technology and leverage to this user segment too.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really cool. I'm actually quite curious as well. So, with the high net worth, what are the kind of products that they get offered versus, say, like a regular retail user?
Yeah, so some of the differentiation here is slightly regulatory driven as well, where sophisticated investors are deemed as being able to use some of these products more. So one example is the staking. So with the credit investor program in Singapore, we allow for staking products to be made available. There's also, again, as I mentioned, there's this white glove servicing, for onboarding, for questions that they might have. in the app itself, like you'll just have a concierge that you can just contact, so you don't even have to kind of pick up the phone or go through a general helpline. We're also providing this kind of 5 basis points FX reduction for accredited investors, and then there will be just more benefits and features that we roll out over time.
Wow, that's really cool. I think overall, from my perspective, Coinbase is kind of the more dominant exchange in Singapore. I'm not sure if it's the same in Southeast Asia as well, but for Singapore, definitely. And what is that like? Because Coinbase started as an American company, and then eventually it kind of expanded everywhere. So how do you kind of balance that? Having a global company, but at the same time, adapting it for more local usage in a way.
Yeah, it's a great question. On one hand, like the benefit of being part of a global company, and especially one like Coinbase, is that you can leverage like some of these assets of having global resources, maybe like a deeper balance sheet. Obviously, the brand name carries a lot of trust and weight, especially when in the industry already. But the offsets are, you have to make sure that you're meeting the users where they are, like around the world. Like you can't just go in with the same kind of value proposition and just kind of same global set of products. You have to localize it. And so that's a lot of the work that we've done over the years. And even Coinbase as an organization has matured a lot since it first started. So today we have over 10, anywhere between 10 to 15 markets where we are onshore, have the relevant licensing, have fiat on ramps and off ramps. And so that's sort of where we're doing a lot of these investments to localize our product and platform. For Singapore, like it's not as, I would say, intensive. Like obviously with SingPass and fast rails, like that's a bulk of the work. But we're doing some fun things like for CNY, like we had a kind of a credit investor CNY campaign. We try to show up at local events. We try to be good sort of hosts within the ecosystem as well. So some of it is also just that, like your go to market also needs to be tailored to the local market, the local customs, and just having that sensitivity can go a long way sometimes.
No, absolutely. And I think, like in general, from what I've observed about Coinbase, is despite being such a big organization globally and even in Singapore, the leadership is very, very involved in like the kind of day to day, because I remember I was having some trouble with my Coinbase account, and I posted on the group, the Singapore kind of crypto group, and you responded, and I wasn't like, I didn't expect that, and you helped me to resolve it very quickly. And even on Twitter, I've seen Brian, sometimes he responds to like very, very small queries. And I think it's so special to have that in an organization, especially one that's so big. Is that kind of part of the culture of Coinbase? Or, what do you guys generally think about that?
Yeah, it's certainly a norm, and as you observed, like it's very top down in that sense. I think Brian's sort of a one of those kind of classic startup founders. Like he started out in Y Combinator, which is the mantra is like make something people want, and the way you do that is you're just constantly talking to users and getting user feedback. Certainly on crypto Twitter is its own little world, and there's always some topic of the day that's going on. But whenever sort of we see that users are having problems accessing their accounts, like you should feel empowered enough to step in and do something about it, and help out our users, because it also helps us kind of keep sharp and stay close to the metal on, hey, maybe there's this sort of bug that this user picked up on, and we just didn't see it there. And that certainly happened with me a bunch of times too. With a lot of our Singapore crypto communities, that somebody will report something, and maybe there was just some quirky thing that like nobody had picked up, and we can then go in and sort of improve that for everyone.
Yeah, no. And also, I think generally, Coinbase is one of the longest standing exchanges in the industry. And it's also one of the only few that's been able to maintain this very clean image. How do you think that's been able to, how do you think you guys have been able to kind of sustain that?
Uh, yeah, if you go back sort of maybe 2 cycles ago, it really was just very, very wild west, and it was sort of unclear, like how big crypto was going to be, and again, like just the posture from some of these specific regulators and regulatory bodies has been fairly kind of hostile at times, and sometimes like they just don't understand the technology, and so it can lead someone down this path of just making short-term decisions. But again, I think when Brian and Fred started the company, they just had a very different vision for what this was meant to be, and how big it could get over the long term. So that like cultural DNA has persisted from day one. And now, as the industry matures and more institutions come in, like you've seen our partnership with BlackRock, we've announced partnerships with JP Morgan, with Citi, with a lot of the GSIB, the big banks. And it's because they see us as maybe the only platform, that can go through their like enhanced sort of, diligence, for onboarding. And they believe that, we can be good stewards of their capital over the long term as well. So it yields benefit, but it has a different ROI curve than maybe some other platforms have taken.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you kind of speak to these big institutions like BlackRock or some of the big banks, what is their general view around crypto and the future of it? How do they view it right now? How are they kind of viewing it right now?
Yeah, it's so wild, like how many 180s we've seen, in the last 12 months. A lot of these banks, like let's say initially, they viewed it with some level of skepticism, and certainly I would say as an industry, I don't think that we help our cause sometimes in terms of talking a lot about like price action and just these kind of very specific tokens. But it all like just fed into this narrative of like, oh, I don't know like how long this thing is going to be around, and is it just a fad and whatnot. But I think for CEOs and management teams that really took the time to sit down and study the technology. Some of them started out by maybe taking minority stakes in crypto companies that were coming up. They started maybe like innovation arms, that were looking at like blockchain technologies. And then if you recall, there was the 27 phase, which was, blockchain, not Bitcoin. And so there were all these like permission enterprise, blockchains that were kind of making their way through. I think ultimately the realization was, look, if you truly want to tap into this technology and what it represents, you have to go open source, and you have to be willing to engage and interface with public networks, like an Ethereum or Solana or Base, because that will then allow you to kind of tap into these global pools of liquidity, global pools of users, and really make something of it. And again, post Genius, a lot of these banks have now announced kind of production stablecoin programs. So they were kind of moving out of pilot. It's funny that everyone wants to launch their own stablecoin, but I don't think that's sort of the only avenue that you can go down. I think there's a lot to be done around stablecoin acceptance, using it for interbank settlements. Even the NYSE's announced they're looking at it for capital market settlements. So I think it's still early innings in that sense, because just the scale of finance like is in the trillions on most kind of major categories, and it's starting to come up faster than I think people expect.
Yeah, definitely. I think given in general just how slow institutions move relative to that, it's been really, really fast as well. And so what's next for Coinbase now, globally within Singapore?
Yeah, one of the big themes that I'm personally very excited about is agentic payments. So this is really kind of at the frontier of the frontier. So, with AI agents just becoming much more competent and sort of enabled every day. If you're following kind of the OpenClaw sort of theme play out as well, I think now that AI is moving from giving you information to now start to do tasks for you. They will. It's a very narrow path to see that they will eventually do kind of commerce and payments on your behalf as well. And what we believe is that the best way for internet native economic actors is to have an internet native form of payment as well, which is stablecoins. Credit cards might work, but I think it's going to be quite frictionful. My mental model is that AI agents can hold USDC, but they can't hold USD. And so, under that kind of premise, we released X402 last year as well, which is an open standard for how internet payments can work by hooking into this sort of 402 error with HTTP. So we've announced a foundation as well, along with Cloudflare, to really make this protocol like open source and neutral. And so a lot of companies and teams and developers are now starting to build on it and experiment with it for, again, how to arm AI agents with some kind of a wallet so that they can go and do things, like maybe access an API to get some sort of a resource that would otherwise require a human to go, log into a website, sign up for an account, attach a credit card, buy some credits. So I think that is something that we see becoming very, very big. Locally, we're participating in MAS's new innovation project called Project Bloom, with this specific initiative on empowering, AI agents with X402.
No, it's I think X402 is super exciting. The project that I was working on last year was also building on X402. It was called Kite AI.
Oh, I've heard of it. Nice.
Yeah, so we're working with PayPal as well for their stablecoin, to use that as kind of the stablecoin for agentic payments. Yeah, so I'm also generally very bullish on, agent to agent payments, agent identity, and these kind of topics. So I think it'll be really cool to see how that kind of develops in 2026,
Yeah.
and going forward as well. So yeah, I think those are most of the questions. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it, and it was great having you on.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for listening to Off the Record. If you like this episode, like, subscribe, and leave a review. It helps the podcast grow. You can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.